Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our academic writing and research course here at the Language Arts Gallery. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit more about research questions, and I'm going to talk about where we can start. So very often when students are faced with the task of writing a thesis or writing a dissertation, the biggest question they have is, where do I start? So today we're going to talk a little bit about what we need to do when we're in the early stages of our research. So, today, on the road to developing a good research question, we're going to talk about what topics are we interested in? We're going to talk about how you can read in the area of interest. Who wants to know? So, essentially, what audience are we writing for? We're going to talk about developing early questions, refining them, and then doing a brief self assessment to see if our questions are good ones. So start with your curiosities. What are you interested in? Now, this doesn't have to be focused. Remember, this is just a starting point. We're starting as a blank slate, and we want to move down the road towards developing good research questions. So these can be very broad topics. And remember, we're going to focus them, we're going to narrow them as we continue to read in our area of interest. So examples of some broad topics. This could be something like women in sports, second language writing, art in ancient Rome. All three of these things by themselves are very broad topics. None of them by themselves are research questions. I couldn't say, tell me about women in sports, tell me about second language writing. Those aren't research questions, but they're very broad topics that can be narrowed. So if you're going to spend several years of your life, or even if you're writing an article and you're going to spend months or a year writing on a particular topic, hopefully it's something that you're interested in, you want to know more about, and you want to make a genuine contribution to academia on that topic. So after you establish your curiosity, you've got to start reading. And a good thing to do here is think about what you already know. If it's something that you're really interested in, maybe you have a really strong background and you can jump right into reading peer-reviewed articles. Maybe you've already read a lot of peer-reviewed articles. If it's not something you have a strong background in, you might need to establish some background. And that might mean some books on the topic. When I started a particular research project, I was dealing with social identity theory and how that impacted academic writers. And I knew a lot about second language writing, but I didn't know a lot about social psychology. So my advisor said, here are two books. You need to read these. You need to establish a bit of a background in this field before you can go and you can digest peer-reviewed articles in that field. So you're going to need to do an honest self-assessment here. What do you already know? And you might choose to start reading peer-reviewed articles and you might say, wow, I don't know enough about this yet, in which case it's always good. Reach out to your professors, maybe an advisor, and figure out what you still need to learn. After you do that, then you can move into more scholarly peer-reviewed journals because ultimately this is going to form the bedrock of your literature review. You're not there yet, but you need to start reading in peer-reviewed articles in your field. So you've got to do a self-assessment of what you know, and then eventually get down that road to reading in peer-reviewed journals. So then we're going to talk about what's been done, right? We're not going to our cars moves yet, but it's always a good idea. I had an advisor who always said, begin with the end in mind. So don't waste your early work. Right now, you're just looking at what's been done. You're not really focusing and establishing that niche yet because we're still dealing broadly with the topic. But you do want to take note of what direction current research is taking. What are researchers doing in the topic that you're interested in? So, like I said, begin with the end in mind. Keep your eyes on the prize. Where do you want to go with your research? So, You're going to need to look at what's been done because that's also going to help you realize what's possible. Then you're going to need to think about your audience. Now, if you're writing a dissertation, you're writing a thesis, you're writing a research article, your audience is going to be the academic discourse community. It's going to be your peers. But this is important with taking note of current research because ultimately, whether you're writing an article or whether you're writing a dissertation, you're going to need to publish and present. Hopefully, you're going to publish and present. So these are the topics that often represent the major themes at conferences. And you're going to be submitting abstracts to these conferences so you can present on these things. So, for example, I do a lot of work with second language writers. Right now, a lot of conferences on language learning and on second language writing are related to the use of artificial intelligence. So, if you were going to gear your research towards something like that, you would have a really good chance of getting accepted into those conferences if your research is good and makes a worthy contribution. Now, after you've done this reading, you've thought about what you're going to do, you're going to need to start asking questions. And remember, we don't want to ask simply descriptive questions. I talked about that in our previous video. We want to be analytical with our questions. So we're going to start asking how and why questions, right? We don't want to just ask yes or no. Does this exist? What exists? Let's start with how and why. Okay. And these things are going to be the building blocks of our research questions. So they might be very simple, something like, how do remote work teams maintain trust? That by itself is not a research question. It's not polished, it's not well developed, but it's a starting point, and that's okay. We can certainly start. Question is, why do people resist vaccine mandates? Again, this is very broad. It's not focused, it's not polished, but it's a good starting point. How do online students stay motivated? Again, we need a lot more context for this question, but these are good starting points. We can develop these into our research questions, but these start to give us some direction. So we're going to want to ask ourselves further questions on the topic. So who exactly does this impact, right? What's the context of our study? If I'm talking about how do online students stay motivated, am I talking about multilingual multilingual first year undergraduate students at major research universities in the United States? Am I talking about primary school students during COVID? I could go in a variety of different directions. So I'm going to need to answer these questions so I can help to focus these research questions. Am I talking about a particular period of time? This is going to impact what type of study I do. Is it a longitudinal study, right? So am I comparing two things? This is going to help me to answer some questions that I'm going to address on the next slide with the type of research questions. And I need to start thinking about what type of research paradigm fits the questions that I'm asking. That's going to give me some indication as to whether I want to do a qualitative study, a quantitative study, or a mixed method study. So some of the types of questions, am I comparing two things? Am I looking for a relationship, a correlation? Is it a causal study? Am I exploring or evaluating something? And this can help us to adjust those questions. And then I want to do an honest self-assessment. So first of all, I might have a great question. It might be something I'm genuinely curious about. If I can't answer it, it's not going to be a good research question. So I need to ask, is the study feasible? Can I get the data? Can I sample the population? These are things I need to think about. And then you're going to need to complete an institutional review board application. So if you don't pass that, you're not going to be able to do your study. So you better ask yourself, is this ethical? Can I do it? And would anyone care about the research I'm doing? You need to do something that hopefully is going to make a contribution. And then start thinking about those questions, thinking about where you said, what type of methods am I going to use? Is the proposed method going to help you to answer that question? And then you're going to need to work to refine it. But once you've got something that's pretty decent, this is where you can go to your advisor and you can say, okay, this is what I got. Your advisor's an expert in the field. They're also an expert in research. They're going to help you to further refine and develop that research question. All right. Great work. Thank you so much for joining us for another video at the Language Arts Gallery. And I'll see you in our next video on research questions.